Hey folks, it's Ray with Taste Radio. Right now I'm honored to be sitting down with Will Nitze, who is the founder and CEO of IQBAR. Will, great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So originally I had hoped that we'd be meeting in Boston and recording in person, but you moved out of the area not too long ago. You're based in Miami, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, just in time for the winter.
You did move just in time. It's actually snowing out right now. But why else besides the weather did you move to Miami?
I've been in Mass for a very long time. I grew up in northern New Jersey, which is also cold, and then I went to high school in Western Mass, and then I went to college in Boston, and then I stayed in Boston for the 10 years after college. And I don't know, I was just ready for a change, ready for warmer weather. I had a buddy who moved down here. I don't have kids, so it's like picking everything up and moving is actually pretty easy. And I also didn't do the COVID thing, where you bounce around Airbnbs or go to random cities. Like I never did that, and I was always kind of jealous of that.
Well, I hear that Miami is a great place to do business these days. Is that true?
Anywhere is a good place to do business if you're selling stuff online. And well, I mean, we don't have an office, and we had an office actually in Boston at Mass Challenge. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but it's an accelerator, and they gave us free office space. So like 2018, 2019, we used their free office space, and then COVID hit, and we've been remote since whatever that day was, like March 9th, 2020 or whatever it was. So we're still very small. So, but we're all over. Our head of sales is in Eugene, Oregon. I'm in Miami. Our creative director is in Salem, Mass. We have a warehouse in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Like it's truly spread out.
When COVID hit, I wonder, were you as active on LinkedIn as you are now? And I say that because on LinkedIn, you are quite active. You have quite a following. As of this recording, you have 40,691 followers and counting. Was that something, was your activity, was your interest in LinkedIn more COVID related, or was it pre-pandemic?
No, I mean, it was a confluence of many things. I mean, for the first couple years of starting and running and growing a consumer goods company that was not seeking to raise mega rounds, I very quickly learned that getting coverage, it was very difficult, right? Like publications don't really want to cover you unless you raised a bunch of money or you got, a zillion new doors or whatever. And so I just sort of over time realized like I have to, in some way, shape, or form, we have to become our own publication, so to speak, and create organic content. And there's also a trend that had taken root by let's say 2020 around founder-led content. I think TikTok was really big for this development, and just people just. I mean, it makes sense, right? People like to hear from people over brands, and so I was just sitting in my dining room with my wife, who's our CMO, and I was like, how do I like what is the channel that I can become my own publication on? I would like, and I was kind of agnostic, right? If I loved making short form video, I would have done TikTok. I just so happened to love writing and sort of pontificating. And I also felt there was a huge arbitrage opportunity. LinkedIn is, for lack of a better term, lame in most people's eyes, right? It's like a resume uploading site historically, and it's pretty like boring stuff that you're gonna find on there. So just an interestingness arbitrage is a lot easier there than on, let's say, TikTok or Instagram or whatever. And then it was just like fun, I just like, so some people wake up and they journal. I wake up and I'll write a post. It's sort of a form of journaling. And then the last thing I would say is there was no obvious benefit. Like I wasn't like, oh, if I do this, that will happen. I'll get new retail doors or whatever. It was truly like trusting in the phenomenon that if I can get a big following, good things will start happening. I don't know what those are, but that will happen. And so, and that has come to pass for sure. I would say the biggest thing is just meeting awesome people you otherwise would have never crossed paths with. But yeah, it was a confluence of a lot of things.
And giving you visibility and a platform to promote your brand. Again, you have well over 40,000 followers. And it seems like when people hear your name or hear the name IQBAR, there's a point of reference. You're like, I've heard of Will, I've heard of IQBAR. And it's not like this is the first time I'm encountering this person or his brand. But the volume of your posts feels like it has a lot to do with the number of people following you. It does. Am I wrong there? It feels like the not only the content matters, but how much you produce on a regular basis.
I mean, I just try to do it daily, for a variety of reasons. Just it's just easy. It's like easier for me to do it daily than for me to do it once a week. As ironic as that may sound, like just getting that daily habit is key, because it's just like you wake up at 7:30 to 8, you do the post, and then you make coffee and yada yada. And then yeah, you see more results, right? Like the more you're posting, the more content you're putting out, the more people will take notice. And it's definitely not easy. I mean, just think about, like, if someone said you have to wake up and generate an insight every morning, that's kind of stressful, just at a high level, right? Because like how many insights are in any one person's brain? Not, that are truly different, unique, original, etc. Not many for most people. So either you can do one of two things, as far as I can tell. You can curate, so take interesting things other people have said or done or whatever and cover it, or you can do something on a day-to-day basis that has a byproduct of spitting out interesting insights, which is entrepreneurship. So like just my day job on a daily basis, I'll have all these like micro insights where it's like, I thought it worked like that, but it works like this. And then I just have this like messy Google Doc where it's just a bulleted list, and I just add that to the list. And then so I wake up and there's no writer's block, because I'm not like, how do I conjure this thought? It's just, let me look at the list. One of them will speak to me, pluck it out, flesh it out, put it into the universe. So that's the way I know other people have, frameworks and templates, and first of all, I wouldn't find that to be fun. Second of all, I don't think it's that differentiated, because it's really dry and sort of square. And then I just don't even think I could create good content that way. It's not authentic to what I would want to say.
Oh, your content is great. And I enjoy reading your posts daily. Your insights, I think, are quite helpful for people who are building brands. And yet, a post that you wrote on LinkedIn this morning says slightly otherwise. I'm going to read that post, the content of that post, which is, this app, meaning LinkedIn, is for inspiration, motivation, networking, and entertainment. If you ever find yourself relying on a social media feed for actual business advice, something has gone very wrong. Hashtag PSA. So on the one hand, I think truly your insights help people to build their businesses and brand build. But you're saying on the other, this isn't really the platform for that. Can you expound?
I don't think my insights do help people build a better business. I just don't. I think people often confuse interesting things and business entertainment and sort of quirky ideas or things that make you laugh or whatever, that whole bundle of stuff that's on your LinkedIn feed. They sometimes confuse that with a prescription for my business. And I just think that's like a terrible idea, because everyone has their own set of contextual details. They're in a certain macro environment. They have a certain fundraising profile. A company that has 100K versus 10 million, you would give very different advice to. They have a different team. They have a different product that's in a different category. They have a different go-to-market strategy. And so I just found that and I also realized this through just asking people for advice, is unless someone has done the thing you want to do in your category, or an adjacent category or a comparable category, like very recently, like no more than 5 years ago, unless all of those check boxes have been checked, the advice is not only useless, it might be harmful because it's going to send you in the wrong direction. And it's going to sound compelling. That's what makes it harmful. You're like, huh, this person has XYZ pedigree and this worked for them, and maybe I do that. And it's like, no, that's the worst thing you could do because you're in a totally different category. You shouldn't be on e-com. You sell a frozen whatever, you know? So, I I don't know. I just it's a PSA because it's like I hate seeing people fall into that trap. And now there's some nuance to that. I actually think LinkedIn can be really useful for networking into the people that you can then have a bilateral discussion with and go really deep on topics and then get actual good prescriptive advice. So it's a good mechanism to find the right people through what I would call maybe like pontifications or business entertainment or whatever. And then in the second step there, you can actually get really good, prescriptive advice given all the context.
Well, you've been in CPG since October 2017, 6 years and 4 months, according to LinkedIn. And it's interesting to me how entrepreneurs learn about the business and use information that others share with them about how to be successful in business. Where did you develop your foundation for learning and ways to succeed in CPG?
Not through any human being. I'll tell you that much. So I think advice is not helpful to get to that end goal. The only way I know how is trial and error, is doing it yourself. And there's a good book called Traction by Gabriel Weinberg and I think Justin Maris, that kind of like covers this topic of, forget the quote unquote playbook, how people 10 years ago got to the promised land. You should look at every possible way you can develop traction. Let's say there's 20 different ways, and don't discount the ones that sound crazy, right? Direct mail or going to events or this or that. Don't discount those. Keep those on the list. And then try all of them. And you pretty quickly you'll learn a number of things. Maybe you'll be surprised, maybe you won't, at what delivers the most traction for any input of 1 unit of energy. But you're going to learn a lot and then just siphon down, double, triple, quadruple down on those things that drive traction. What is going to drive traction though today? You would get totally different results 10 years ago. And by the way, the number of black swan events in the last couple of years is like breathtaking, right? COVID, the Silicon Valley Bank collapse, like so much crazy dynamic shifting events have occurred that have changed the game. I just fundamentally believe you have to engage in trial and error, collect data, learn from data, and iterate. And I don't know a better way of doing it. Now, there's some objectively right ways to do certain things, right? Accounting is accounting. GAAP accounting is GAAP accounting. There's a right way to have, set up a P&L. Like, fair enough. But the things that actually drive success or failure in a business, sales, marketing, product, go-to-market, et cetera, that is constantly changing.
Yeah, you're right. It is constantly changing. I don't necessarily think it's sort of flip a coin and maybe this will work, maybe this won't work based on the brand or category that you're involved in. I do think, as you mentioned, fundamentals are so important to nail down. And, if you don't have a CFO or, an accountant on your team, or at least someone who knows numbers, you would do well to hire someone like that. But are there any lessons just in terms of the basics of building a brand that have helped you? Because I don't want it to sound like, or I don't think you're saying that we tried a whole bunch of things that weren't common to or traditional to building a brand. I don't think you're saying that. I think it's more, there are certain fundamentals you need to adhere to, but there are other things that we had to learn as we went.
Totally. No, I mean, to be clear, you should be copying 90%. Everything I just said is in the final 10%, right? So don't try to get creative in incorporating your business. Don't try to get creative in how you do financials. Don't try, I would argue, don't, for most people, don't try to get creative in how you do flavor profiles. Like, there's a whole series of things that I think in the vast majority of cases, you should not try to get creative on. You should do what's either right and or give the people what they want. And then in that last 10% though, which is really just like, how do I take this thing and scale it up? It is trial and error, but it's not haphazard trial and error, right? It's trying things based on highly educated guesses or data or anecdotes you're seeing in the marketplace. And then just like constantly refining your perspective. I think you were asking about, what are like the basic block and tackling things of building a brand. I think I won't give a revolutionary answer to that. It's like product, it sounds weird, but people stop at pretty good. And I think that kills brands. Like everyone knows you got to get from like okay to pretty good. And then one thing I've seen is a lot of people just stop at pretty good or good enough. And they don't, and then they'll start obsessing over LTV to CAC metrics and how do I make better creative and how do I hire more people and yada yada. Not realizing that if you had gotten that product from pretty good to excellent, like all of that would have improved massively. Like the number one thing you could always do to improve all metrics is improve your product 10%. And I think branding is not that far behind that, right? There's just such a fundamental uptick in business you can do if you have branding that appropriately calls out the right hierarchy, delivers the right aesthetics, et cetera. So like product brand, like just table stakes and push that truly to the limit because the multiplier effect across all other aspects of the business is so massive. The other thing is just like gross margin and finance and fundraising. Like it's very, very basic concepts, right? How much money am I making before taking all other expenses out? And then how much money do I have in the bank? And this is another really interesting topic around, bootstrap. There's a whole thing in the last couple of years where bootstrapping, it's like the rise of bootstrapping. Everyone's obsessed with bootstrapping and keep more equity and yada, yada. I fundamentally think that's like the worst thing you could ever do in consumer goods. Unless you're rich or you have a rich uncle or whatever, right? Like then fair enough. But even if it is possible, I don't think that it's advisable. But on the flip side of that, so, okay, let's say you do need some money. On the flip side, how do you be as minimally dilutive as possible? How do you, like for me, my whole thing was own more than half the business when I sell the business. How do I make that possible? And you can just work backwards from it. Okay, I need to raise over across XYZ rounds over this period of time. The valuation needs to be this, and this. I'll get diluted that down there. And cool. And then, of course, like I said, gross margin plays right into that because the better your gross margin, the less times you're raising and the quicker you get to profitability. And so like product branding, gross margin, having enough money in the bank. And then the last thing I would say is just like go to market. This is one where I think there's people drink the Kool-Aid of people who have been successful. Like there's the playbook, start in natural, go to conventional, go to big box, go to club. I think that's like so dangerous when people just try and shove that down your throat as an entrepreneur. It's like, yeah, that maybe that works. Like that could work and that did work. But like, what about e-commerce? Like I would argue for most brands that can pull it off, they should be in their first couple of years be doing e-com only. I think NutPods just got acquired. I think they did e-com only for the first 3 years before they even touched, and they crushed it on e-com, and then subsequently crushed it in brick and mortar. I don't think that's a coincidence, but you don't really hear that from like people purveying the playbook, because frankly, they don't understand e-commerce in many cases, and they don't understand how e-commerce has evolved. like one random anecdote, we got our biggest retailers we got because of our online presence. Think about that. Like, it wasn't like, oh, what are your velocities at other retailer? It was like, oh, I saw your Amazon ranking. That was literally how we got into like the biggest retailers we're in. People wouldn't tell, like, that's not necessarily intuitive, and people wouldn't have predicted that or told you that that was going to happen, but that is what happened, right? So just your go-to market is the last thing I would say, and just sub bullet point, choose channels that scale well. Amazon would be an example that scales well, and what I mean by that is, can I double, triple, quadruple my revenue in this channel and hire 0 new people? In other words, what's like a dial I'm twisting, and I could just twist it harder, and it scales really well. There's some brick and mortar channels that are similar to that too. So I think those are my blocking and tackling tips.
Will, you said a lot there, and I love everything that you said. I want to break down a couple things. One, you talked about nut pods, and nut pods is a great example and a great brand for this conversation, because when it came out, frankly, I didn't really understand the need for a brand like this. But I am not someone who needed a brand like nut pods, but it did solve this demand, this thirst for a vegan, non-dairy creamer. When you thought about launching IQBAR, did solving a need come into play, or was it much more of a personal drive to create a CPG brand and a personal need for this type of product?
It was definitely a personal need. And I don't even know if it was a need, it was like a want. Often people say, find some need. You could also just find some strong want. I was really into brain related stuff. I studied psych and neuroscience, among other things, in college. And then I experienced failings in my own brain in my first job because I had a terrible diet and I was getting headaches and brain fog, mental fatigue on a daily basis, yada, yada, yada. And so I got really interested in the intersection of nutrition and cognition, and how the things you eat today impact your brain this afternoon, and then also how the things you eat for the next 30 years impact what happens to your brain when you're 60, 70, whatever. And a couple of books really impacted me too. Grain Brain was one of them, by David Perlmutter. But basically what I realized was there's really no ready to eat thing that sat at that intersection. Like if you looked at cookies or bars or what have you, it was all body, body, body. Like build muscle, improve digestion, lose weight, like all body, right? Cliff Bar, the classic bar, it's a rock climber, go hike a mountain. And I didn't really get that. Like why? And there are two things. There are two things we care a lot about, which is our brain and body, and we seem to be focusing on functionality around just one of those. But there was, of course, no data, like market data, that the market wanted this thing. I mean, this is why a General Mills or whatever would never do this, because there's no data that people want it, right? You're taking a total shot in the dark. But I wanted it, and I thought other people probably wanted it too. What I then learned over the ensuing year was incredibly nuanced, and that whole idea of what people want and how they related to our product got massaged many times, because the net of it is basically I created brain food. I did a Kickstarter. It went well, raised a little bit of money, started selling, and very quickly I learned people don't really want brain food, which may sound funny for me to say that. They want a bar that delivers, that checks 4 or 5 check boxes they have that are nutritional check boxes. Let's say protein source, sugar count, carb count, label cleanliness, price point. And then, and only after you check all 5 of those boxes, can you kind of interest them in some pluses, shall we say. So, and there's this kind of unique brain element to it. But the order of operations there is critical. If you inverse if you invert that order of operations and you start with sort of a off-putting or arcane framing of your brand, it's intimidating to people. Instead, meet them where they are. I want a chocolate sea salt bar that has 12 grams of plant protein and 1 gram of sugar and the price point I can get behind. And oh, by the way, brain nutrients. That was like maybe the biggest unlock of the entire company's history. Like that realization, because then it allows you to scale into Walmart and Target and Costco and Sam's Club and BJ, right? No one's going into BJ's looking for brain food. That's not a thing. So that was like the scale unlocker.
In your hierarchy of importance, I'm a little surprised that you didn't include taste as near the top of the list. And I feel like taste really does allow you to scale in those mass retailers that you mentioned. And earlier in our conversation, you did talk about increasing the tasteability or the flavor of your product, or optimizing the flavor of your product by 10%. And that can solve a lot of problems. That can solve a lot of goals, or that can address a lot of goals that you have. How does taste factor into your business strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty simple. Like everything I just described is how you get someone to try, right? And then taste is how you get someone to rebuy. So which is rebuying is just as important as trying, if not more, because it's more cost effective to get someone to buy it a second time. So that's the delineation I would give there, and that's like critically important too. And it's taste, but with functional foods, it's also how you feel. Like when you try, when you eat a plate of fries, that tastes really good, and then you feel terrible. Now you might go back just because it tasted so damn good that you're willing to make that trade-off. But if you can hit taste and make them feel good, well, that's the holy grail, right? So I think it's both of those things, especially with functional. Like people in the bar set, they want function. Part of the function is, oh, this digests well, and makes me feel good. So no, I mean it's critically important. Taste is king and always has been. And there is a moment there with certain trends where, funnily enough, that was not the case. Like take keto, right? That it was such a craze that you could put the word keto on a piece of cardboard and someone would still eat it, because the motivation centered around the diet superseded taste appeal and preferences around taste to such a great degree, that you could build a thriving business with the product that tasted terrible. It was kind of a wild moment in time, and that's not the only time that's happened, but that's probably a good example. So, but then everything reverts back to the mean, right? Everything reverts back to the mean. A couple of years later, Hershey's stock was at an all-time high. They'd never been selling more Reese's. They'd never been selling more chocolate bars. Why? Because it tastes good and it's cheap. Price. Price is the most overlooked variable in all of consumer goods, in my opinion. No one's going to try your thing in BJ's or Costco or Walmart if it's not priced right. I mean, some will, but you will never hit mass market. No one talks about price.
When we spoke last, we talked about, or you talked about, creating a $50 million brand with only 6 people, which you're not at $50 million yet, but the idea of trying to get to that revenue point, or that revenue goal with only 6 people sounds pretty remarkable. How do you go about hiring and thinking about full-time employees versus outsourced help?
I hate hiring. It's my least favorite thing ever. Second, maybe only to firing. Because it's just so impactful and so risky. When you have 6 people, you bring on someone and it doesn't work, it's like devastating. Now, at some point, if you really scale your business, you're going to have to hire more people. But for us, we were always like, how do we, and this coincided with the market correcting and everyone saying you need to have tiny SG&A and be capitally efficient. So we were doing it before it was in vogue, but It now is very much in vogue, to just have less people. And you can create an analog to hiring someone, which is hiring a third party. It's maybe more expensive per unit of time, but less expensive overall, because for a variety of reasons, they have maybe better experience, better tools, more focused, yada, yada. And you can fire them tomorrow, right? And feel okay about that, right? And so we've definitely created a hub and a spoke model of a really awesome core team of people. And then the spokes go out to an Amazon agency, an agency who helps us with emails, an agency who helps us with our website, blog posts, et cetera, many of which we would have had to hire people to do. That's just how we did it, right? There's many examples of other people who insourced that and have won. So this is like, comes back to the LinkedIn thing of like, I could go out and say, you need to have only 5 people and you need to do that. It's like, no, I can give you an anecdote or a case study of how that has worked and will work, but you could also do the opposite and that could work too. So, but I do really like it. I do really like it. And the only other thing I would harken back to is it is only possible if you operate in channels that scale.
How do your investors feel about your staffing strategy? Sometimes investors will make recommendations in terms of, oh, you need a person for this aspect of your business, or you should consider hiring this person full time. They'll help you scale. But how do your investors think about or get involved with that strategy?
Well, the first question is, have they ever built a business? Maybe, maybe not. Again, advice is cheap. And I think one thing investors can tend to do, and we have great investors, by the way, but can tend to do is say, oh, XYZ other portfolio company did this and that worked really well for them. Again, we'll keep coming back to that same LinkedIn post from this morning. That's great that worked for them. Are they in our exact geography with our exact retailers, with our exact form factor, with our exact gross margin? No, 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 no. Yes, no. Like, okay, then that's not that useful. Thank you, though. Like, so you just absorb so much data being in the thick of it on a daily basis that when people are like, maybe you should, it's not to say you don't consider it, right? Someone gives you a piece of advice, you think, okay, let me take that in. Let me look at those other portfolio companies. How did that work for them? And so it's not that it's not useful, it's just the odds that you already didn't have that thought already, yourself, because you're so close to it all, is pretty low. And then also, you can get creative to solve any one solution. So an investor might say, hey, go hire this person. And you might say, well, have you thought about instead doing it via 2 third parties in this way? No, I actually hadn't. Why hadn't you? Because you haven't seen it before. Just because you haven't seen it before doesn't mean it's not going to work. I mean, the classic example is like Skinny Pop, right? They had like no people and they scaled massively. I can't really think of, that seems to be like the GOAT of like low SG&A to revenue ratio. But I want to be like those guys because everyone talks about them in a good way. No one's like, oh, that was so lame they didn't have more people. It's like, no, they're flabbergasted that they pulled that off. I want to be that group of people. So why would you instruct me to do otherwise if I could approximate what they did over there? But it's a dialogue,
Yeah. I mean, if I were an investor, I would think having a smaller staff, but highly effective staff would be pretty attractive. And it would also, I think, put the founder in a good position to fight for a valuation that they thought was reasonable and right for their company. And you've talked about this. You've talked about the importance of fighting for the valuation that you believe represents the value of your company. But how do you do it and actually get an investor to buy in to that belief?
I'm going to say some things that may seem like mean or whatever, but they're not. It just is what it is. I think the earliest stages, first of all, angel investors are the best investors. They just are, right? You get the best terms, you move the fastest. It's just the least headaches. The documents are cleaner, more founder friendly, yada, yada, right? So I've told our institutional investors this, if I could only ever raise from angels, I would. There are only so many people who can write $500,000 checks though, right? So, but our first two fundraising rounds, we raised from angels. I think it was 625K and then $1 million a year later.
How many checks did you collect, and what was the average size?
I think it was the first one, the 625. We had two like whales, 200K each. And then the last like 225 was super easy. I think there was one guy who came in for 100, and then the rest were like, 50, 50, 25, whatever. But a lot of people will say, I think the idea of a strategic investor is like the biggest myth, maybe in all of startups. I think it's a total farce. Unless they're turning on sales, they have some freakish operational skills you have that you don't have and they can help you with. They can introduce you to other investors or help you raise other money, or they can help you with hiring. Maybe there's a couple other things, but those things almost never come to pass anyway, right? Go just talk to people about how many times those things have happened. They're like, yeah, maybe, well, I got advice here and there. Okay, and you couldn't have gotten that advice by just calling them? Well, maybe, right? So people are always like, yeah, find seasoned food and beverage investors. I would do the exact opposite. I do the exact opposite. I mean, those people are going to beat you up on value all day long because, frankly, they're just smarter in this space. They're not smarter, period. They're smarter in this space because they do it all the time. Why would you want to negotiate with that guy or gal? So anyway, all the earliest money we raised was from people not in CPG. Like I think we raised over $2 million before we got to like a single CPG investor. And by the way, all those people are going to crush it on their investment. That's like the great thing, right? But then, yeah, I mean, and once you get to the point at which you need institutional money, now you are negotiating with people who have made a lot of food and bever, deals and are going to just frankly grind you harder. And that's just comes down to like, how good are you at negotiating? How good a storyteller are you? But we have great partners. I mean, we Circle Up, who I guess got acquired by Rose Park Advisors, was our first institutional investor, and then Lotus Bakeries was our second institutional investor. But we were able to keep control of the company even after, $10 million of fundraising over the course of whatever, it's been 6 and change years. Why? Because it's like everyone says, the first money is the most expensive. If you just get totally screwed on that first couple of fundraisers, like that matters way more what you do there than like the third, fourth, and fifth.
Will, you had said that getting the funding you want comes down to how good of a storyteller you are or how good of a negotiator you are. And almost like they're kind of one and the same. Are they?
Storyteller versus negotiator?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Venn diagram overlaps for sure. Because you're telling a forward looking. So, I mean, what do you do when you negotiate with an investor? You tell two stories. You tell a backwards looking story, and then you tell a forwards looking story. Backwards looking is actually involves a good amount of storytelling too. And then forward looking is pure storytelling, right? And then you're saying, and therefore you should value us at X. So yeah, you can't really negotiate well without telling really good stories and painting a really good picture. One of the really cool things about Circle Up was that I think it's the coolest model ever. I don't know why more people didn't do it and don't do it. They just use data. They're like, I'm not gonna like get your product, try it, and then I really like it, and then I'm gonna invest. Like, who cares what I think? Just look at the data. And mostly when I say that, I mean like Amazon data, because you can create proxies for how on trend something is, how much it's growing, yada yada. And so they hit us up because we just had a lot of good, we looked good in the data. And it was totally unemotional. So actually, frankly, a lot of like that storytelling I would have had to tell was told for me. Um, but yeah, and then there's all these things that are not really storytelling, which is, I mean, I guess you could everything's storytelling at a certain level, but how do you play people off each other? How do you make it seem like you don't need money? It's all the standard negotiating tactics. Um, but it's cool because I've done it now with three different types of entities, like people, angel investors, high net worth individuals, a venture capital fund, and then a strategic. And they were all very different. So it's kind of cool. I've been able to see three different takes on it.
How much did innovation or trends influence the investors that you've had from angels to institutional? Because when you think about sort of a brain health bar in 2017, pretty innovative. I mean, you didn't see a lot of that kind of food out there. Nowadays, it's a little bit more common to see functionality, brain boosting functionality in food and beverages. Maybe it's on trend. You could probably say that. But how much does that matter to investors? How much does that matter to your investors?
A lot, a lot. And by the way, I like sort of hurt myself. I remember in talking with Circle Up, I said what I said to you earlier about, well, actually, people often buy us because they're keto, or they buy us because they want 12 grams of plant protein. And they're like, huh, like that's interesting because your name is IQBAR. You frame yourself as a brain, bar, blah, blah, blah. So, no, I mean, it matters a lot. But one thing I would say, which I think is important for a bit, as a business leader, but also just to run a company that's resilient, is never, ever be too tethered to a trend. Look at all the brands that were keto first. They're all dead or dying or on their way there, save for a few. Then look at like Quest, right? They could have gone that keto angle and they were like, no, we're just 20 grams of protein, 3 grams net carbs, 1 gram sugar. We know this is the demo we're going after. And Quest is like $1 billion in sales or something. Like they've never been doing better, right? So just I can't emphasize that enough. Don't tether yourself to a hot trend or ingredient, right? Chia was really big back in the day, and then it wasn't, and then kale wasn't, and then it wasn't. I guess that you could call that a trend too. But so for us, it's like, how do we be resilient against trends? Keto can come and go. We need to keep growing. Brain health can get hot and cold. We need to keep growing. And the way we do that is we just hook people in like 10 different ways, right? So you might just want a well-priced peanut butter chocolate chip bar with low sugar. Like you might just want that, and we can hook you in that way. The brain thing might be interesting, and we can hook you in that way. You might be on a keto diet, we can hook you in that way. You might have just turned vegan and you were eating a RX bar, but now you want a plant-based protein bar. Well, we can hook you in that way. And so it's almost like a diversified stock portfolio, right? You're diversifying your value proposition such that as any given one waxes and wanes, you're going to be okay, right? You can grow through that.
Yeah, risk mitigation is inherent to portfolio diversification, and I think brand platforming is similar in that way. It can be kind of dangerous though to get into other product categories. How do you know, or how did you know when to get into a different space and support it the way it needs to be supported in a particular retailer?
I think you need to feel that you have really sure footing on your first, form factor. It's not having existential risks on a monthly basis. It's growing nicely. I don't know. It's hard to say like the exact moment in time, but I think generally that should be kind of the feeling you're getting. And then some people would say just don't expand. Why would you expand, right? You're complicating the asset. The same buyer might buy bars, what like might not buy hydration mixes. And so, the jury is out. I think we made like a very smart decision in both the categories we moved into, and that's proved itself out in sales. But no, there's no like perfect moment. For us, I think we took a bit of a contrarian approach because most people that are snack food companies will make more snacks. It was a bar, now it's a chocolate, it's a Reese's peanut butter cup knockoff. And for us, we wanted to be entirely non-cannibalizing. We don't want you to eat this instead of that. We want you to consume this and that. And then it has to be coherent with the brain and body thing, right? So, and then it has to check 10 other boxes. It has to be long shelf life. It has to have a 40 plus gross margin out the gate. It has to, be a category that's huge and growing. So we did that with hydration, and then we did that with coffee. And so now it's like satiate, hydrate, caffeinate, all those different non-cannibalizing functions that spread across your day sit under this umbrella of brain and body nutrition. And some people will consume A and B, but not C. And some people will consume just A or A and C. And that's fine. I also think this is a function, why we did this is a function of us being an e-com first brand. That's in our DNA. Right? So if you're just brick and mortar, it's kind of weird to go into a totally different part of the grocery store because there's no synergies there. Whereas online, there's massive synergies. We can build your cart bigger and bigger and bigger, and we can grow your average order value. Because maybe you don't want 48 bars, but you'll get 24 bars and then some hydration, right? So I think that played a big role, us being e-com first.
Will, we did skip over one part of your story that I think is really important. At least I skipped over it, which is you said, you don't think about the traditional way of go-to-market as being that effective. You think about natural specialty, conventional, and mass. You looked at it as, oh, why not go into mass early on? Why not get into some of the bigger retailers early on? I think the hardest part is, A, can you fill those orders on time and consistently? And B, how do you get on shelf? How do you get in touch with those retail buyers and develop relationships with them such that they buy into your vision and your brand? I mean, what was your process? How did you, say, approach a Walmart, and how are you successful in landing that account?
E-commerce. E-com is like even if you break even, right, you can build up scale and operational excellence through e-com and get accounts through e-com. So you might have been knocking on the category manager at Walmart's door for 2 years, and he doesn't care until he sees, oh, you're the 10th best-selling bar on Amazon or what have you. So, and you can make so many more mistakes too, because you can just iterate and revise them way quicker. Whereas if you're on shelf in 1,000 locations, like you can't just yank all that back. So you get way more do-overs and you can trial a lot more stuff. So I'd say e-com helps in all of it. And then you just have more of a brand presence, right? People in Columbus, Ohio buy you online. So if you go into Kroger, some percentage of those people already know who you are. So I think it's not possible for everyone, but for us, for things that are ship friendly and a category people buy online, I know I've said it earlier, but I really do like that move of trying to build I mean, heck, you could, again, going back to Nut Pods, they must have built a $10 million plus business online before they really hammered brick and mortar. And that had to massively help them in brick and mortar. Frankly, another determinant was we just didn't get into Whole Foods. which is kind of like the bellwether or the anchor account. Because originally we used allulose and that was a banned ingredient. So we're like, all right, it's not that we wouldn't go in, we couldn't go in. So we're like, okay, that's not going to be how we're going to grow. Like, fair enough. How else can we grow? And things like that will happen throughout your life cycle. Like something that may have been a good next step is just not available to you. You still have to grow though, right? So this is why startups are so hard. You have to pull revenue out of thin air when certain doors are closed to you. So that was a helpful forcing function for us.
I want to come full circle here and talk about some of the stuff that you see on LinkedIn where, people are being congratulated for achieving a certain goal or talking about some step that they made. I think some of that stuff, and everyone would probably admit to this, is a little smoke and mirrors. And, there's just the day-to-day grind of building a brand. And you and I chatted about this last time, which is that, if I'm quoting you correctly, CPG is boring as hell. You could lie and say that it isn't. But what's interesting is the business. The fascinating stuff is the business. Is that what motivates you today? Is that what's going to continue to motivate you to build IQBAR?
That's what motivates me to do my whole career. I think that dynamic will be true. A protein bar is only so interesting. Once you've stared at it and eaten 1,000 of it over the course of years and years, that's not that fun. And, that's not that stimulating, shall we say. But all the wild dynamics that surround scaling, moving millions and millions and millions of them, that's fascinating and challenging. But to your earlier point, again, I keep coming back actually to the post from this morning around don't feel like a social media feed is a prescription for your business. That is harmful, in my opinion. To have all that backslapping going on makes you think you should be doing what that company is doing when in most cases you shouldn't. In most cases you shouldn't. Most cases you should be doing what Kevin's or True Fruit or any of these other giant brands that flew under the radar that no one was backslapping those people. They were just silently executing at a great gross margin, right? So that's why it's actually like maybe a problem in some ways. Think about like the it brands of 2018, 2019, 2020. How many of those brands are in a good financial position today? Very few, very few. Because there was a come to Jesus moment in 2022, all the money dried up, multiples went down. Just so many, fundamentally, what people want out of your brand was turned on its head. So if I had just followed you and what you were doing because of all this congratulatory stuff, like I'm SOL. And so that's why I think it's dangerous. That's why I'm like, guys, this is entertainment. Like, don't get it twisted. The real facts lie in deep conversations you have with really thoughtful people offline who have all the contextual elements in their head and ultra up-to-date relevant knowledge.
As much as, the content that we see on LinkedIn might be less useful than a lot of people realize, I think that the content from this conversation is quite useful. And I really, really appreciate you sharing it with me and our audience. And I really look forward to speaking again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.